You are listening to The Clarity Talk.
And here we go. Hey, Jessica, welcome to the Clarity Talk Show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
All fine. Nice to see you, Shubh. Sab theek hai?
So, Jessica, basically, हमारे podcast में, we try to talk to people from various backgrounds who have had different and, various experiences. And with the sort of experience that you have, I think we all have a lot to learn from you. आपके जो diverse background है and आपने जो मतलब बिहार से ही specially जो आपने experiences यहाँ पे gain किए हैं, we all need to learn a lot from you. ये conversation को we will start by talking about you. Could you please आप थोड़ा सा अपने journey के बारे में हल्का सा बताओ सबको please?
हाँ, बिल्कुल. नमस्ते, मेरा नाम जेसिका कुमार है and I'm living in Bihar for last about 5 years. लेकिन उससे पहले मैं तो actually, if you count all of the years, I've lived in India for, on and off for 15 years. I'm originally from the US and originally from the Chicago area. अगर कोई यहाँ पूछते हैं आप कहाँ से हो मैडम और पूछते हैं और शिकागो का नाम नहीं जानते हैं obviously your listeners will know Chicago but मैं बताती हूँ कि जहाँ धूम 3 की शूटिंग हुई फिल्म शूटिंग वही शिकागो है.
Okay.
तो फिर जैसे कभी गांव में जाते हैं और लोगों को नहीं पता है शिकागो कहाँ है तो वही सब बताती हूँ. I first came to India as a young person for an internship.
Okay.
I was working in IT and I had an internship back in 2006 and at that time I also learned Hindi. उधर भी हिंदी सीखी हरिद्वार में रह रही थी
हरिद्वार
उस टाइम.
में.
जी, तो वो बड़ा शहर नहीं है, वो छोटा सा टाउन है. So anyhow, that was my experience. फिर उसके बाद मैं वापस US गई and I had met Abhishek, my now husband, in the US at that time. So we met in the US and he knew that, I was interested in India, ये हिंदी भी बोलती हैं and all that. So we got connected and yeah, we just connected right away. Just instant friendship and then we eventually got married and with the blessing of both of our parents, set of parents and families. And eventually after a few years, we had our first kid and after a few years of living in the US, we felt that we were back to India. So we did that in 2016 and अभी तो 5 साल चल रहा है.
Okay.
बिहार में हम लोग वापस गए बिहार. Abhishek is originally from Bihar and we've been there since then working and enjoying the life of everything that we have in Bihar.
That's great. By the way, what was your age when you came to India for the first time for your internship?
23.
Okay, you were 23. What you said you were in IT. What sort of a company were you working in? Could you also tell us
So
about that?
it was it was really small actually. So don't be afraid of joining a startup.
Okay.
Anyone who's listening, if it has good people and solid people that are very committed and very good, then I think there's no need to be afraid of like joining a startup. क्योंकि startup भी बहुत जल्दी grow कर सकते हैं.
Right.
If you're willing to put in the work. And at that time I was working, there was 11 people in the company. Now there's more than 200 people in that company. And I was one of the first like interns at that time. And I would spend my days at the office and then my mornings and evenings doing Hindi study.
Oh, wow.
So it was my my passion, I guess you could say. मेरा interest भी था हिंदी
Right.
सीखने का. And it was really good to help me communicate more with the office people and also with like families and to make friends in that area. So yeah, and I'm in marketing basically. Like my career has basically been in marketing only, digital marketing and all that. So that's been kind of my focus this whole career. I've worked in different companies, like I was in IT and then I've been in like a non-profit setting for the last I guess about 10 years has been my focus is like nonprofit marketing, like NGO type roles. So
Okay, so a 23-year-old student who is into marketing, uh, coming to India seems very unlikely. What was the reasons? आपके दिमाग में क्या चल रहा था when you decided to come to India?
Actually, मेरे पापा international business में है. And I always saw him, going. He was mostly at that time was like China, Korea, when in 90s, when I was growing up. So I just saw that, and I realized, I also want to do the same thing. And my parents were very supportive at that time. No one stopped me from going to travel, going overseas, getting a job in a different country.
Right.
किसी ने मुझे कभी रोका नहीं कोई चीज में. And it's a little different because I was raised to be extremely independent. So it wasn't like, oh, can I go to India? It was like, oh, by the way, I'm thinking about going to India. I got an internship and I'm leaving in May. So wait to baat hai. And I think it's just different. I had always had these ideas about India, and a lot of them were not true.
Yes, we will talk about that as well.
हाँ, बिल्कुल.
आपकी जो जर्नी है ये मतलब बहुत ही डिफरेंट है, स्पेशली आपने जो बताया कि आपका जो रोल रहा एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, एंड कमिंग फ्रॉम द यूएस कमिंग टू इंडिया इज वेरी डिफरेंट एट दिस, बट एट द सेम टाइम यू से कि you wanted to come to a new culture, you wanted to come to a new country, so it must have been an exciting experience. So to talk more about it, हम थोड़ा culture related बातें करेंगे इस conversation में, because देखा जाए तो आपसे बात करने के लिए बहुत सारे topics है. Like I listened to your podcast, and trust me, when I was preparing myself for this podcast, for this conversation, there were so many topics to talk about because you have covered so many things in your podcast. And so I decided कि नहीं भाई, इस podcast को let's restrict this to culture, or the culture experience that you had. And therefore culture से related पहला जो मेरा question है आपसे वो ये है कि जब एक आदमी दूसरे किसी न्यू कल्चर में जाता है, उसे अडाप्ट करने की कोशिश करता है, तो देयर इज ऑब्वियसली अ लॉट ऑफ चैलेंजेस दैट ही और शी हैज टू फेस. बट आपने जो ऐसा हाईलाइट किया अपने एक पॉडकास्ट में कि देयर वाज एन एडिशनल चैलेंज व्हिच यू हैड टू फेस, व्हिच इज दैट you are a white person, and a white person in India has a different position in the society. एक अंडरटोन आ जाता है ऑफ सुप्रेमेसी का, ऑफ सुपीरियोरिटी का. लोग आपको बेटर परसीव करते हैं फॉर सम रीजन और द अदर. लोग मान के चलते हैं कि अच्छा ये वाइट पर्सन है, ही और शी इज बेटर देन मी. देयर इज colonial history that is to blame. There is the culture, the Hollywood imitation of Hollywood culture in India, all of this. But however, what was your experience like? What were the challenges? Could you please explain more on this?
I'm really glad you brought that up, Shubh, because that's a very important piece of what it is like to live in India as a foreigner, and especially for me, and even for learning language, working, all of that. It's a very important component. So I would say that thank you for bringing that up. First of all, I would say, yeah, I think it's episode 9 that I have on my podcast, which can be found on Apple, Spotify, JioSaavn, Ghana, and YouTube for the Invisible India podcast.
Guys, go there and listen to Invisible India podcast. It's really amazing.
Thank you. So this particular episode, I talk about being white in India and what that's like. So it's like this this double-edged sword in a sense, where there's the extreme high regard, or there's an extreme low regard. So sometimes you'll be treated very, very nicely, or sometimes you'll be treated very poorly. And so, especially as a woman, I realized that there's these negative kind of stereotypes that might come from Hollywood, that might come from whatever, that my morals may be bad, or I might have certain attitudes about relationships or sex or whatever, and that is entirely something I've had to deal with and battle with. It's these misperceptions. So I'm aware of all those being there, but also one thing I wasn't prepared about was how much people would like defer to me as a white person, and saying like, because of that internalized colonialism, which is very much still there in India. And people have this somewhere in their mind, not everyone, but sometimes that is there, that like foreigners, especially if you're a white foreigner, that you're like better than Indians, which is not true at all. But there's this somewhere in the mindset, there's something there. And you have to I did not realize that coming in, and people would like ask me to speak at things. People would ask me to be a part of this, that. They're trying to kind of use me as a token foreigner in these different ways. And even if I was like the most stupid moron ever, and people would still want to, you know, have me as their friend. Right. I mean, I hope I'm better than that. But, you know, just saying that, you know, people would, even if you're the biggest zero in society, if you're a white person, people still want to be your friend, simply because of that fact. So I realized very quickly that, you know, even now today, one of the things that I'm really focusing on now is using my platform not just as an attention for myself of like, अरे ये हिंदी बोलती है कैसी सीखी है, वो Indian culture के बारे में कैसे सीखी है, but actually how can I use that attention to defer it to people in India who are breaking stereotypes, so we can talk about these different things like internalized colonialism. Let's talk about it, right? ऐसे क्यों है, इस ये दिमाग में क्यों चल रहा है, दिमाग में ऐसे क्यों आइडिया पड़ा रहता है.
लोग इस बारे में ज्यादा बात नहीं करते हैं, कभी सोचते नहीं है, तो समझ में नहीं आता है कि प्रॉब्लम कितना डीप है.
Exactly. And we only have or confronted with it when we're in these situations where there are more and more foreigners in India nowadays, and we're interacting more and more with the world as India becomes a more globalized society, and more Indians go abroad and realize, I think people quickly realize when you go abroad that, like, I think my husband realized very quickly when he went to the US, you know, that this place is not all that I fantasized about. And actually people are really screwed up everywhere. Every place has problems. Every society has problems. Every culture has problems. And US definitely has a lot of problems. So he came and he was like, when he got married to me, he knew what he was getting into, what kind of problems people have here, what kind of mess is in society here. It was like, वो Hollywood वाला fantasy एकदम खत्म हो गया था.
समझ रहे हैं.
So I think that's good to understand that, you know, there are just major differences.
Right. तो well, Jessica, आप बेसिकली ये कहना चाहते हो कि हर सोसाइटी के अपने अपने चैलेंजेस होते हैं, उसके अंदर अपने अपने कुछ प्रॉब्लम्स होते हैं, तो एक सोसाइटी या फिर एक कल्चर जब दूसरे कल्चर को अपने से बेटर मानने लगती है तो वो बिल्कुल गलत हो जाता है.
बिल्कुल.
आपको अपने आप को अपने पर्सपेक्टिव में, अपने जो बाउंड्रीज है उनमें पहले देखना चाहिए, तब अपने आप को फिर दूसरे कल्चर से सीखने के लिए जरूर देखना चाहिए. मगर अगले को आप पहले से सुपीरियर मान लोगे, पहले से बेटर मान लोगे, तो दैट विल नॉट हेल्प, राइट?
एग्जैक्टली. एंड ऑल्सो आप अपने आप को नीचे मत समझिएगा. If you're from a different place, I think that's the thing, is like, even I don't think Americans or Europeans think that, oh, I'm so much better than these people. Some people might, but also as an Indian, you should not think that I'm less than them. I think that's also there. Dono sides hai.
That's really great. Your views on this topic was really great, Jessica. We now talk about language. किसी भी कल्चर को अपनाने का मेरे हिसाब से क्या मतलब, मैंने जो भी अभी तक पढ़ा या फिर जो भी अभी तक सीखा, किसी भी नए कल्चर को अपनाने का सबसे पहला कदम होता है उसकी भाषा को समझना. भाषा ही वो विंडो है जिसके थ्रू अपने कल्चर में घुस सकते हो. हाउ करेक्ट एम आई?
हाँ, बिल्कुल सही है. And the complicated thing about India is there's not one language. There are so many languages, and then there's so many dialects and sub languages and accents and all that within that. So
it's pretty difficult in that case. India is very, very diverse.
Very much.
However, आपके केस में आपने हिंदी बहुत अच्छे से सीखी, एंड आपसे आपके जो वीडियोस मैंने देखा, आपके जो पॉडकास्ट मैंने सुना, उसको क्या कि ये तो कह सकता हूँ एटलीस्ट कि आपकी हिंदी मेरे से अच्छी है। मतलब
हाँ,
जो
नहीं वो तो बात नहीं।
बोल चाल की जो भाषा वाली हिंदी होती है वो तो हम बोल लेते हैं, लेकिन वो जो अच्छी हिंदी होती है, वो जो साहित्य वाली हिंदी होती है, वो हमसे नहीं होता है। हम
नहीं
हमारे
नहीं
में
नहीं,
बहुत हिंदी में हमने गलती
सब
की
बात
है।
नहीं है भाई।
तो जैसे कि जरा आप ऑडियंस को बताएं कि कैसे आपने हिंदी को इतने अच्छे से सीखा, मतलब वो क्या वो प्रोसेस होता है जिससे लोग एक नए लैंग्वेज
हम्म
को सीख सकते हैं।
हम्म हाँ, बता सकते हैं। So my main thing was always learning from people and not from books or
हम्म।
app. I mean, उस time तो app था ही नहीं,
हाँ।
because this was like in early 2000s. I didn't have smartphone, all that stuff. That hadn't come in India yet either. So um, I just learned from people, and I think that's still the best way. Of course, if you around people you want to learn from, or people who are going to speak in your target language with you, then you have to resort to these like apps or books or whatever. But I think the best thing, the number one best thing, is immersion, and that's what I did. I was immersed in the
इमर्शन।
culture. I had to speak it. I had to figure it out. And I also was very I kind of cut my from English. So I mean, I would call my parents like once a month. Man, I'm still
ओह।
alive, I'm still here. Yeah, I would barely call. They would never call. I was just like, I would get on the, ISD, or, no one even knows what that is anymore. Like the STD, ISD, like booth. And I would make my
हाँ।
call, or I had the international card, and it was such a mess. And, I just totally immersed myself in the local culture. And that's the number one way to learn any language, is immersion, immersion, immersion. If you cannot immerse yourself, get a tutor of some kind who can work with you and help you to learn. And some people say, oh, Bollywood movie deck. If you have zero exposure to a language, like me, I had no exposure to Hindi at all, except for like namaste. I knew nothing. And then you're not going to learn from Bollywood movies. So maybe if you're from Afghanistan, or if you're from like somewhere that has some similarity, of language, like from Pashto or from Parsi or whatever, you can kind of like pick it up and learn. That's one thing. But if you're learning in a completely different language, don't even try to learn from Bollywood movies. That's not a good suggestion. Immersion, tutor, and then of course I have a lot of recommendations on my website about different programs that I've reviewed and suggest to people, for adults, for kids, for multiple languages, whether that's Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Tamil, Malayalam, a lot of different languages, which people are doing excellent methodologies for. Yeah, my method was just, kind of the old style of just dump yourself in and figure it out. But I did do a program which helped to guide me a little bit, and that was working with a tutor in the midst of immersion.
Okay, so Jessica, according to you, the key to learning a new language is immersion.
I would say yes, immersion and practicing, speaking, listening a lot, and speaking, listening, speaking. वही बात है. बोलते हैं आप पढ़ना सीखो, लिखना सीखो, सबसे पहले देवनागरी सीखो. ठीक है, देवनागरी सीखने की बहुत जरूरत है इस बात में, अगर हिंदी सीखोगे तब. But maybe not in the very beginning. Just hear the sounds for like 2-3 months constantly, and then you'll pick it up.
Okay.
So
that's great. That's great. By the way, when you talk about immersion, there is a sense of adapting a new culture. आप एक नए culture में अपने आप को adapt करने लगते हो, अपने culture के part बनने लगते हो. And when you're doing this, when you're trying to learn a new language or become a part of new culture, starting में तो आप एक outsider रहते हो. आप जब एक नए कल्चर में आते हो तो पीपल, उस कल्चर के लोग भी आपको एज अ आउटसाइडर ट्रीट करते हो, और आप भी अपने आप को एक एज अ आउटसाइडर दिमाग में मान के चलते हो, आप चीज़ों को ऑब्जर्व करते हो. बट स्लोली दिस आउटसाइडर स्टार्ट बिकमिंग अ पार्ट ऑफ दैट कल्चर. When that happens, when that sort of adaptation happen, how does one stay in touch with their roots? क्या ऐसा होता है कि एक नए कल्चर को अडॉप्ट करते करते we lose touch with our roots? And if that is the case, then how can one avoid that?
Excellent question. So I think there's two ways I could answer this. First one is, are you learning like a person like yourself or myself by choice? You're learning a new language by choice because you want to improve yourself. You want to, learn something. There's so many people around the world that are learning languages because they have to, right? Like out of they're forced, like people who refugee from Syria and now they're living in Germany. They have to learn German. They've been forced out. People who are from Nepali, Bhutanese refugees, now they're living in the United States. They have to learn English, right? It's not a choice. It's not that, oh, I'm gonna improve myself on my resume. It's like I have to survive. So I think there's two ways to look at that, where there's people are always very excited when they see someone like me who's chosen to learn a new language. But we also often neglect people who are, in a sense, polyglot, speak many languages, but no one recognizes them because they're just like a working class person, or if they're a refugee or something. So anyway, I just wanted to say that before I answer the question, that if you're learning out of choice like me, then I think it's a really important thing just to keep in mind, like, who are you learning from? Who are the people who are teaching you, and how can you give regards to them? How can you remember them in your if you're getting accolades, or if you're getting praised later on? You said in the beginning that, oh, we have a lot to learn from you, and I'm like, अरे यार, मैं तो India आके तो बहुत कुछ सीखे हैं Indians से. So I've learned a lot from Indians, and I don't ever want to forget that.
That's really very great of you to think in that way. And you आपने से पहले बात की अपने मैरिज के बारे में. तो आपका जो ये मैरिज है, विच इज अ क्रॉस कल्चर मैरिज, एंड द वेरी आइडिया ऑफ क्रॉस कल्चर मैरिज, जब कल मैं इस बारे में सोच रहा था, तो स्टार्टिंग में तो बहुत एक्साइटिंग लगा सोच के कि कितना कुछ नया सीखने को मिलेगा अपने पार्टनर से, हमेशा एक्साइटिंग चीजें रहेंगी बातें करने के लिए, एवरी टाइम समथिंग न्यू. But I do realize there are problems, there are challenges. So could you highlight some of the challenges for cross culture marriages, and while you do that, also tell us some of the exciting moments, some of the exciting things that you had in this marriage.
Oh yeah, good. Thank you for acknowledging that. I want to say one thing too, I forgot to mention in your last question. I did just do one episode on not losing yourself while learning a new language. So wo to mera, I think, most recent episode, number 62 maybe, or 61. Okay. 61, 62, 60, I don't know, something like that, my most recent episode. So about my relationship, my marriage, my partnership, I would say it's very accurate to say that there's a lot of great things, a lot of very exciting things, always something new. And this is the thing that even we change over time. So I am not the same person I was even 10 years ago.
Right.
Partner, husband Abhishek is not the same he was 10 years ago. And I always am learning new things about him because he's changing. And so I would say that if you're getting married to someone because of the idea of them, like, oh, I want to get married with a Russian lady, or I want to get married with, British lady or something. Some people have these funny ideas, like, because, oh, these people are like this, these people are like that. I would check that many times and double check your assumptions and your actual expectations. Motives. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Check your motives, because you don't want to get married to someone for the idea of them. You want to get married to that person because of who they are and how you want to see them change over time. So I would say that you have to be very careful in, just not like marrying someone for a trophy, because they'll disappoint you in some ways. if you marry somebody that you want just as a trophy.
Right. So with respect to cross culture marriage, and especially with cross culture marriage in India, what were the challenges that you face? मतलब when I ask this question, I think about in-laws के side से कैसा reaction था, society का कैसा reaction था, how you guys were able to pull it through, ये सब चीजें. तो could you just highlight on those things?
Sure. शुरुआत में actually मेरा बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम नहीं था क्योंकि मैं ऑलरेडी हिंदी थी और मैं तो सूट साड़ी पहनती थी बहुत खुशी से और सिंदूर चूड़ी पहनती थी बहुत खुशी से. And so people, I think because I was so interested in Indian culture, people, and I am interested in Indian culture, people were very accepting of me. Because अरे ये तो बहू बन गई है हम लोग का. It's like हाँ ठीक है, मैं तो बन गई हूँ. But also I think that made it much smoother for me because I had a natural interest in that. And my in-laws are very understanding. ये लोग वो लोग जानते हैं कि मैं कितना दूर से आई हूँ. They have been, to the US. They've seen the house I grew up in. They've seen the way my life was in the US. They've seen everything. And then they've seen me in Bihar for the last several years. So they know मैं कितने दूर से आ रही हूँ. रोज मेरा दिमाग इधर है, मैं इतने दूर आ रही हूँ, पहुँच रही हूँ. अपने thinking में, अपने सोच में, अपने जो हर चीज में. So they're very understanding towards me. And if I want to go do something, I'll give you one example, okay? My mother-in-law is very traditional. बहुत ही traditional है. वो सलवार पैंट तक नहीं पहनती, साड़ी ही पहनती. ठीक है? So I wanted to compete in a half marathon, okay?
Okay.
Patna.
In Patna.
In Patna, huh? It was starting first time, okay? And I was like, I want to compete in that, okay? So कितने लोग अपने बहू को encourage करेंगे इसमें? मेरी 1 साल की बेटी थी उस टाइम, 1 साल की बेटी, ठीक है? तो कौन वो लोग एक बार भी नहीं बोले कि कौन रखेगा बच्चा, कैसे करोगी, और ये वो लोग नहीं पूछे, वो लोग बिल्कुल नहीं पूछे. और मेरे हस्बैंड ने बहुत सपोर्ट दिए हैं, बोलो ठीक है हम रखेंगे 2-4 घंटा रखेंगे, ठीक है तुम फिर जल्दी अपना करो, फिर जल्दी वापस आओ, दूध पिलाओ, बस सुलाओ उसको, ठीक है. And they supported me in that. कौन देखेगा, कौन क्या कहेगा, they didn't care. They supported me in that. And I went with my friends. We went सुबह निकल के दौड़ने गए उसमें, and I won a prize also that day because I competed in that, and they supported me.
Fine, you learn the Hindi language, good, you like the culture, that's great. But then when you go and tell your parents that I'm marrying a guy from India and I'm shifting to India, what were their reaction? And also what were your friends' reactions?
My parents, again, like I came from a typical American family, like white American family. They're like, fine, you want to do that, fine. They don't care. It's like जो तुम करना चाहते ठीक है, just if you want to marry whoever you want to marry, that's fine. I mean, they of course they wanted to get to know Abhishek. They got to know him. He also met my family many times, and he also did talk to my father about like, oh, I want to get married to her, like I want to have your blessing, and he gave a blessing and all that. So like in that sense my family is a little bit traditional, but overall they're like fine. Now the only problem came when after I had kids and then I wanted to move back to India.
Okay.
तब थोड़ा सा problem है. अरे they're बच्चे इतने दूर रहेंगे, आप लोग कब वापस आ रहे हैं, बच्चों के लिए ये सही नहीं है, इंडिया सही नहीं है. Sometimes they would say, or they would like have these thoughts about these things, but I think that they've had to cope with that fact that their grandchildren live very, very far away. That's hard for them for sure, and it's hard for all of us. But it is what it is, and can't really. I'm following my dream of living in India, and I want to do that, and so.
So Jessica, when we talk about differences in culture, तो we also realize कि American food and Indian food ये दोनों बहुत ही different है. जब दिमाग में अमेरिकन फूड आता है तो मतलब दिमाग में आती हैं फ्राइज, दिमाग में आती है बर्गर, steak. There is a lot of meat and there is a lot of potatoes in the American food. However, India में there is a lot of spices. When you think about Indian food, it's very hot and it's very spicy. Vegetables बहुत सारे different vegetables हैं. There is also meat here, मगर वो करी बहुत ज़्यादा spicy होती है. तो there is a difference in the American food and the Indian food. आप जब अमेरिका से यूएस से इंडिया है तो हाउ स्ट्राइकिंग you find this difference? How are you able to cope with it? And अब now that you have a good experience of both the cultures, कौन सा food आपको ज़्यादा मतलब tasty and ज़्यादा better लगता है?
Well, first thing I want to say is that there's nothing called American food. So American food, because America, right, like, is made up of immigrants. So the only original Americans are the Native Americans, right, who lived here originally and still live here. So I would say that it is tricky because, what you see in the movies is not necessarily what people eat at home. And it depends on what family you're from, right? So like in my family, yeah, I'm from mostly like European background, like mixed European background. So my family does do what you said, right? Like meats and vegetables, like that's what they eat. Salad and whatever. That's kind of what's part of the cuisine. But that's more like European heritage, right? But what about Chinese Americans? They're Americans. People have been here for many. What about Indian Americans?
Italian Americans.
Italian Americans. So all of those cuisines are also American food in a sense, if you want to call it that. Okay, so that's just one thing. But to answer what I think you're trying to ask is from what I grew up with, how did I react to that Indian food? So I would say that now I'm fully, I don't think I could live without Indian food. हम लोग कभी अमेरिका जाते हैं तो फिर हम लोग को क्रेविंग होता है कि चलो दाल चावल खाना है, गरम गरम सब्जी खानी है, गरम रोटी खानी है. And of course, being married to an Indian, we eat a lot of Indian food. Like in India, we're eating 90% Indian food. Like obviously, हम लोग ये खाते हैं.
Okay.
और कभी बाहर जाते हैं तो फिर हम लोग अमेरिकन खाना खाते हैं या मिक्स खाते हैं. हम लोग भी बनाते हैं घर में Indian खाना. So I obviously love both cuisines. I am crazy about like the Indian vegetarian food there's nothing like it in the world. Like, yeah, I'm thinking now, मैं कल क्या बनाऊं, थोड़ा पालक पनीर बनाऊंगी कल. दिमाग में आया तो फिर.
You're in the US right now. अगर पटना में होता तो I would ask you to invite me for पालक पनीर. The last question here, and this is in question में 3 question है basically. Okay, so Jessica, you have had a lot of experience in India and you have lived for a past few years in Bihar. तो आपने बिहार का भी बहुत अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस लिया है. मेरा सवाल है कि बहुत सारे स्टीरियोटाइप्स इंडिया के अंदर ही बहुत सारे डिफरेंट कल्चर्स हैं एंड इंडिया के अंदर ही डिफरेंट जो स्टेट्स है उनमें बिहार के प्रति एक स्टीरियोटाइप बैठा हुआ है. आप जब बिहारी शब्द सुनते हो तो आपके दिमाग में कुछ बातें हैं जो कि आप ना चाहो तो भी आ जाती है. मैंने भी 2-3 बार जब बिहार के बाहर गए, हम जब बिहार के बाहर गए तो वहाँ पे देखिए लोगों का रिएक्शन थोड़ा डिफरेंट रहता है. तो ये स्टीरियोटाइप्स जरा क्या है, आप हल्का सा मतलब इस पे बताएं कि आपका लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंस क्या रहा है, कि आप इनमें से किन स्टीरियोटाइप्स को आप सही मानते हैं, क्या कोई ऐसा भी है जो गलत है आपके हिसाब से?
Okay. I think that people have these stereotypes that Bihar is, एकदम पीछे हैं, एकदम backward
पिछड़ा,
है, एकदम
हाँ.
ये है, वो है, पिछड़ा है. I mean, in some senses, it is accurate, but in some senses, it's not accurate at all. I think there's some very forward-thinking people. There are very incredibly innovative people. And I personally find that Bihari people can be quite humble. I really enjoy the way that people behave there nicely with other people. I mean, I've seen, even compared to other places where I lived, right? The way that um, people would treat each other, it's not the stereotype that you would think. Like, log road mein abuse maar rahe hain, ye kar ke kar, you know, ye sab, this is like, you know, people think like jungle raj and all this. This is not accurate. I mean, in some places it might be accurate, but this is not the dominant culture there. And of course, some of the things that people would have, you know, the agricultural sense, like, of course, there's a strong agricultural component, and that comes into the city as well. So it's not going to be like South Delhi and is the same as Patna.
Right.
You know, it's not the same. Like, you're going to have gai, bhais, bakri, ghoda, chal raha in the city, in Patna, and everywhere in the villages, of course. You know, this is not like a posh, you see elements of like South Delhi, like nice cafe, nice restaurant, but then of course you're going to have like gai bhas chal raha outside. So that's there, and I think when people see that, and like kachra bachra and road wagera, obviously, you know, there's some improvement that needs to be made. Not gonna pretend that's not accurate, because there'll be some very nice roads and very bad roads. But overall, I think that, you know, there's a lot of new things emerging in Bihar, and I don't want to miss it. I think it's incredible time to be in India, and I'm thankful to have lived 5 years in Bihar, and looking forward to whatever the future holds.
That's great, Jessica. And before we end this conversation, आप जाते जाते जरा ये भी बता दो कि पटना में या फिर बिहार में कौन से ऐसे प्लेसेस है जहाँ पे आप विजिट करना पसंद करते हो?
Okay, हाँ, मैं बताती हूँ that in Bihar, I have really enjoyed visiting the Valmiki Nagar Tiger Reserve.
Okay.
It's very nice, especially the Mangraha side, the more undeveloped. Okay? But I would say, like, this is for people who are really nature lovers, which I am a big nature lover. If you want like posh and like nice food and nice, you know, AC, whatever, nice accommodation, that's not it. But if you want to see like asli Bihar, asli jungle, asli nature, you should go there. It's very stunning.
Great.
Very stunning. Of course, I love Bodh Gaya. Everyone loves Bodh Gaya. Rajgir, I have not been in a few years, but it's very nice.
And
And
Patna
a
में?
lot more places to explore. I hear a lot of things about the other nature. I hope that we can continue to develop the tourism in Bihar. There's amazing things to see there, and I hope that many people can enjoy.
And Patna में, what are the places that you visit?
Patna mein actually, zoo.
Patna
I
Zoo.
love to visit the zoo. Amazing zoo.
Do you go there for
Very
morning
nice.
walks कि आप ऐसे ही जाते हो?
दोनों.
दोनों,
Morning
अरे
walk के लिए, बच्चों को घुमाने के लिए बहुत पसंद है. And of course, I have my cafes and restaurants, and I love I'll give a shout out to the Coco Mojo Cafe on Boring Road. It's my favorite.
Oh, that's great.
Excellent cuisine and drinks.
Great, Jessica. So now we've come to an end of the conversation, and I must say it was really a pleasure hosting you. And there were a lot of experiences that you shared. You know, I resounded to some of them, and some of them were very new to. I think many of the audience, or many of the listeners, will find it very new. And before we end this conversation, any closing remark from your side? आप कुछ भी बोलना चाहते हो about Bihar's culture or India's culture or anything?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. मुझे बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है आपसे बात करना और जब भी मैं interview देती हूँ किसी के साथ, so I just always want to say that I'm just very thankful for the way that people are very interested in my story, and I don't take this for granted कि यहाँ मैं तो इतनी special हूँ, वैसे ही हूँ, ऐसे ही हूँ. I'm very touched actually that people want to hear my story and what happened and how I came to this point. And um, I have a lot to learn still, and I have many years ahead to learn. And thank you for your time of spending with me. मुझे बहुत ही अच्छा लग रहा है और मैं सबको request करती हूँ कि आप मुझे social media में follow कीजिए. Invisible India is my handle on most Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, of course, and whatever else is out there. And of course, YouTube, the podcast is on all these things. So
right.
I love to hear from people. I love to connect with people, and let's keep a conversation going.
That's great, Jessica. Once again, thank you so much, and the pleasure is all mine to host you here.
Thank you, Shobhan. Keep up the good work on Clarity podcast.
Thank you so much.